All right, we're gonna try this again. Welcome everybody back. I'll try and move this over. I think I changed cameras. We'll see what happens. That's better. Okay. Welcome to the Pop Culture Squad. As we were saying before the echoes started, we made it home from Chicago,
Yay.
and I want to start talking about some cool stuff. There's so much stuff going on in comics and pop culture right now. There are so many movies to be excited about and trailers to be seen and whatnot.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of trailers.
A lot of trailers. It's so much that I had to write a post about it last week. There were so many good ones. There's a new
Yeah,
one today.
that was last week.
I know. There's new ones today. Today the new Marvels came out. That looks good.
Yep, yep. I'm sorry, I apologize. I have to stop eating on
Okay,
camera.
that's all
I'm
right.
I'm actually I was feeling a little low blood sugary.
Well, we want you to not feel that way. So eat if you need to. It's
Well,
completely accessible.
I just bought a box of Honey Smacks
Well,
because I was at the supermarket and they had this Honey Smacks display, and I thought, wow, I haven't had that since I was a kid. When I was a kid, it was called Sugar Smacks, and
yes.
then they changed the name to Honey Smacks, and then
Did that make
they
it
changed.
better?
No, but sugar was like evil,
Yeah. I understand.
and it is. But then they decided they didn't like Honey Smacks, so they changed. They just dropped the word honey, and they called it Smacks. And I was thinking that's not a good choice. And after a
Well,
couple of years, evidently they agreed with me because they brought back the honey part of Honey Smacks.
yeah, sure.
What the hell?
Well, what are you smacking?
That's right.
Um,
That's right. I
I
don't know if
want
that's a phrase that people still use.
to. I want to. I'm going to bring in a not a slide. Go back. I'm going to bring in something that I have here going up, and it's related to the latest Brainiac on Banjo, which went live on Pop Culture Squad yesterday.
Ooh,
There
look at
was a
that.
quote from the head honcho at DC Studios, co-head honcho, from James Gunn, who said, "I'm certain that there's more likely now that I'm in charge at DC, talking about the chance of a crossover between DC and Marvel.
Right.
Who knows? Just don't expect anything on that front in the immediate future. That many years, though, I think we have to establish that what we're doing at DC first. I would be lying to say that we haven't discussed it, but all discussions have been very light and fun. So that has generated quite the hubbub in the
That's because
communities.
there's no money involved yet. Once there's
Exactly,
money involved, things change.
exactly. So I'm going to put in the comments a link to Mike's article, and what what you'll see there, you kind of talked about the crossovers that happened at between DC and Marvel in the comic side of things. You know, there's never really
Right.
been anything on the media side of things. And you were there when they did the first one, which was Superman and Spider Man, right?
Actually, I got there just a couple of months later.
Well, it came
Just a
out in
couple of months later.
'78, I guess.
No, that was Ali. Ali was 78. The 76, early
Okay, 76,
76.
76. I'm sorry. Okay, it was 76
Right.
then. So,
Early
but
76.
so let's go here for a second. Let's go back to this, and we were talking about this guy, right?
Yep.
So what was the mood? And well, just to follow up, it took a while, but eventually this came out. Were you involved in the discussions about this because it was several
I believe
years later?
I believe I was involved in some of the discussions. Yeah, I didn't have any sort of hands in it, but
Well,
from a
what was
marketing.
the mood?
Well, the mood during the Superman, Spider-Man, the first one, was first it was like DC saying like we're giving Marvel a boost, and then Marvel and most of the people who worked at DC who were under 50 at the time, which oddly includes me, said, "No, you're wrong. It's not really giving Marvel a boost. Arguably, it might even give DC a boost, or more of a boost. But the fact of the matter is, it gave everybody a boost. We loved the artwork.
It was interesting
This,
because a lot of the artwork, it was a lot of people doing the artwork. There was a lot of fixings here and there. There was
yes,
uncredited. Neil did some fixings on the DC side. Ramita did some fixings on the Marvel side.
yes. Um, but that's fixing stuff that's wrong, not fixing storytelling or anything
Sure,
like
sure,
that.
sure.
And it was, I thought it was beautiful. Quite frankly, I miss those big ass tabloids.
Yeah. So they were
You know,
big.
I mean, the best thing that Neil ever did after Ben Casey, the newspaper strip, which is my favorite of his work, the best thing that I think he did was that Superman versus Muhammad Ali thing, particularly
Right.
that beautiful full page down shot of Superman having been beaten the hell up by Ali.
Yep.
And I told Neil, coincidentally, I ran into Neil right after I'd done a convention that, like I came back the previous day. And that happened right after the book was released.
So this was Chicago Comic Con, right?
No, maybe. I don't, who knows? It was
Okay.
78, so I'm lucky I remember my name from 78. I think it was the same. So I told Neil that people went nuts over that one page. I mean, everybody commented on that one page. And Neil had this broad ass smile on his face, ear to ear. And because you could tell from the expression on his face, from the expression in his eyes, that was exactly what he wanted.
Yeah.
He wanted people to be blown away by the fact that Superman got beat up, and got beat up bad, by the heavyweight champion of the world, or the
Right.
universe, I guess. Really,
Sure, at the time.
at that story. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Cool part about that is if you look at the cover, all
You're
the
on
people in the audience at the fight are real people. And
Yeah.
I'm there sitting next to a guy named Steve Ross, who's no longer with us. Steve was the guy
he
who
was the owner, right? Wasn't he?
he was the head. I mean,
He was the head
it
of,
was a
of
corporation.
Warner CBS or something like that at the
It's
time.
Warner's. Yeah, he was the guy who put together Kinney National Services, which became Warner Communications, which became, a million other things. It was before Warner Brothers took direct control from Warner Publishing. Warner Publishing went out of business.
Right.
And because we had merged with ourselves, we had merged with Warner Brothers, which was a different part of Warner Communications.
Which is a whole licensing financing thing that I've seen people talking about recently, and how there are differences in why you couldn't say Batman on CW because they would have to pay themselves, and a lot of the things have changed recently in the fact that the way they're doing licensing now is like, no, we don't have to license it, we already own it.
Right. Well, there's a philosophy in business, in corporate empires, that any division that is doing something that is competitive, like producing TV shows out of your property, you have to do the deal on an arm's length basis. In other words, you have to do all the deal stuff the same as you would with, if it was Columbia Pictures or somebody like that.
Right.
Because the other people who are involved can sue you and say, you gave yourselves a sweetheart deal and I'm making less money because of it. So people...
Well, I don't think they care anymore, though.
It's not that they don't care, and some still do. It's just that they figured out, after 50 years, they figured out ways around it.
Right. I have one more question I want to bring about in terms of crossovers. And if you have any knowledge of this one.
Uh-oh. Absolutely none.
Okay, so interesting because I thought you might have talked to Denny at some point about it. The issue is
No, it didn't come up.
the
Nor
interesting
with
thing.
nor with
It
Barry,
sure
but we'll probably be seeing him in Baltimore. Maybe
we will
we
see
can,
Barry.
yeah, maybe we can interview him or something.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
The interesting part about that is that was kind of the beginning of this '90s crush of crossovers. It was, and it's funny
Yes.
because I missed a lot of that for some reason. And I didn't care too much about it. But like from that point until I guess Amalgam-ish was kind of the end of all those. But there was a ton of them.
Yes.
There was a Green Lantern Silver Surfer. There were two Batman Punishers. There was another Spider-Man Batman, tons and tons of stuff. And then the last thing I think that they've done and probably will be for a long time was the JLA Avengers finally, which was long in coming.
Yeah, I'd actually seen the first, I don't know, dozen or 2 dozen pages of that.
Of the original,
Of
which
the
was
original, yeah.
from the 80s, right? Wasn't it in the 80s they were
Yeah.
working on that?
Oh, it was yes, yes, mid-80s, as I recall.
But this
But
is by far the best DC Marvel crossover. Do you agree or not?
you think so? I feel the same way
I absolutely feel the same way.
because
It was perfect for me.
the work was impeccable,
Oh yes.
and Darkseid made a great Marvel villain to absolutely nobody's surprise. But still, it was kind of cool to see him in the action, involved in action against the Marvel characters.
Right.
Whereas, I mean, nobody cares about Luthor. You can have some great Luthor stories, and they're
No,
much better Luthor stories, but he's not the presence of a Darkseid or a Doctor Doom or anything like that. So it was a
and
formidable story.
both villains were perfectly chosen. The art was I don't say this lightly, but it's some of Walter's finest work. And that's I don't say that
Impossible
lightly.
for me to parse out.
Sure, I understand that. I
I
understand that,
was
but it is there's nothing to quibble about. Um,
that's true. I was a fan of Walter's stuff for at least 5 years before I met him.
and I think Terry Austin inking him really helped a lot too. It's weird.
Well,
And
Terry's a great inker.
Terry is a great inker, but it was really it kind of softened the DC stuff that needed to be just in certain ways.
Let me tell you a brief Walter Simonson penciling story. Very
Okay,
brief.
and then we're gonna bring in our guests, so everyone just hang
Okay.
on.
So, so Walter comes in and he's bringing his pencils in, to the office to get lettered. This is in the 70s. And Sal Harrison was president of the company, used to be production manager, was an impeccable production guy, which is not to minimize the thing. He
Sure.
did wonderful work. He and Jack Adler invented the coloring system in the 40s, and he really knows his stuff. And he was also a painter. When he'd go
Hmm.
home and stuff, he'd paint. He collected original comic book art, and had a wonderful collection. So Walter brings in his stuff, and Sal is there, in the bullpen, and Sal asks to see it. Walter gives it to him, and literally, Sal could not figure out which end was up because Walter's pencils
Pencils.
were, let me politely say, loose. Now he had spotted the balloon placements, so the letterer didn't have to figure it out. I mean, it would
Right.
help, and having the balloon placements did help. But Sal said, "How can you work with this?" And Walter says, "Well, look, I'm inking this, so it's really just important that I know what all this stuff means." And Sal just nodded and said, "Yes," but he'd never seen pencils. It's not even a matter of pencils that loose. It sort of looked like a puzzle page,
Well,
trying to
yeah. I
figure
mean,
out who was it.
I think I've seen some of it, but John Workman and I have talked about how he had to do a lot of the work, with not knowing what was going to be there.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Well, Kurtzman Harvey Kurtzman on his war books and on Mad had Ben Oda
Mm.
lettering it,
Hmm.
and he would write the script and do these sort of thumbnail placements for the artists, many of whom followed them slavishly. Some did not. Most added stuff to it, like Woody and Elder would they'd add a lot of stuff, but it was Kurtzman's storytelling, and the guy. I mean, obviously really knew his stuff, but when I asked Ben many years later, back in the '70s, how he liked working on what were essentially blank boards. And it didn't faze him at all. He was used to it. He had been doing that forever.
Yep.
Um, he said the trick is in trusting the artist to actually draw it right. Now, that artist could be the penciler, the artist could be the inker, the
Right.
artist could be everybody and their mother, but, it was an act of faith for him. Ben was a great guy. I really enjoyed him. He would come in at the end of the day, around 5 o'clock, pick up a stack of penciled pages, and I mean a stack like that.
Hmm.
Take them home. His whole family would work overnight. Had his own little sweatshop, which you can do if you have talented kids. And then in the morning, he or somebody else, we never know who, would bring those lettered pages back to the office. The reason why we never know who was because they were delivered before anybody got there. They were
Wow.
waiting at reception.
That's crazy.
You know. Oh, that's great. Ben was lettering, a lot of newspaper strips at the time. He was doing the Phantom, as I
He
recall.
was so
Yeah.
prolific.
Oh
So
yeah,
prolific.
yeah.
And
I,
high quality.
and a wonderful guy. I mean, I know that you've done a lot of writing about lettering, and
Hmm.
I respect that. And Todd Klein, who's a phenomenal letterer and
Hmm.
an amazing designer, uh, has a website where he talks about that a lot, and he
Yep.
participates in Facebook and that sort of thing. So he really explains it to people. And if you think that lettering is easy or is any less an artistic skill
Mm.
than drawing or writing or anything else, Marty Pascal once told me the choice of a letterer was important to him as a writer, as the choice of an inker was to a penciler.
Interesting.
And yeah, I got that totally. And
Oh, I get it.
every time I worked with him, which was on Blackhawk and on E-Man and on a number of other projects, I would always discuss lettering styles and letterers with him before I'd make that assignment.
We're going to bring in our guest who
Okay.
has worked with some crazy good letterers, which have been really important. I will tell you, there's a couple of things that the lettering, not to diminish anything, but like the lettering enhanced some of the books that he's written in really, really important ways. So we're going to bring in our good friend Mark Russell now, and I want to just clarify something because I'm somewhat vain and I need to do this. So you said when I said to everybody that we were going to have Mark Russell on, that two old men, you being the vastly older of the two, beating up on another younger writer. I want you to know that Mark Russell is 2 years older than me.
Is he really?
He is. I just look decrepit and ancient. So
Oh, wow.
he is
So
laughing in the green room.
You're
but we're gonna-
telling me that Mark Russell is the Pat Boone of comics.
Absolutely. So, Mark Russell, for those who don't know, is a writer who's been in comics for about a decade now. His first book, God Is Disappointed in You, with illustrations from Shannon Wheeler, was released in 2013. His first comic series was Prez from DC in 2015. And he followed that up with a string of critically acclaimed series at DC. He's been published since by Marvel, Dynamite, Ahoy, AWA, Ablaze, Humanoids, and I think that's it, but it could be more. He's probably going to correct me. He has won Eisner and Ringo Awards. He has, as well as his work he has also won a prestigious GLAAD Award in 2019 for Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles. And before I trip over my tongue any further, let's bring him in just a second here. See, it is he is the Pat Boone with that, especially with that last promo image, right? Hi, Mark.
I think that picture was like 7 years old. I don't know why that one is the one that's.
Well, you
still...
sent it to me. That's
okay,
why
well that's why then. I don't know. I have.
I said, "What do you want me to use?" And you said, "Use this one."
I have like 5 headshots that I just sort of randomly send out to people when they ask for headshots. I need to probably get some new ones.
Kind of makes you look like John Barrowman, which is a wonderful person to be compared to. I think
I was happy being compared to Pat Boone.
So, Mike Gold, Mark Russell, Mike Gold. I'm glad you guys have finally met.
We spoke before.
Did we?
Yeah.
Did you guys? Where did we run into each other?
Well, we I think it was on this or some other podcast. But I know I've spoken to Mike before.
I don't know.
I'm so memorable.
Well, you are. Well, anyway, let's talk. Before we get too deep into some stuff, because we can get lost in the weeds, I want to talk about the Kickstarter. I'm gonna put the link. I'm gonna put the link in the comment section so anybody can click on it. And I'm going to also remove this.
How long is
so it's called Bunk Bed Mishaps, and go ahead, Mark. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so it's a collection of my cartoons, which will probably disappoint a lot of people who know me as a writer. That I'm also an artist, albeit an amateur artist. But I'm actually very proud of these cartoons. It's a lot of them are have been drawn over a long period of time, and they're a lot different than my writing. My writing's usually kind of like very character driven and full of social commentary. And these are not. These are single panels, just weird ideas that came to me, like snippets of conversation that that would never take place, or scenes from movies that would never be made. That's kind of how I think of these cartoons. They're just interesting sentences that came to me in the shower that I have no other outlet for. So I really like it because it's different than what I do normally, and it's a different creative outlet. And it's one I've, hitherto kept to myself, perhaps for good reasons. But now I would like to impose them on the rest of the world.
I'm excited for it. In a wonderful tradition that you may not be aware of.
Yeah.
A lot of writers could draw, not necessarily brilliantly. And I mean people who started out in the business as writers, not people who started out as artists who became writers. Your Dan Jurgens of this world, to name but one. But Archie Goodwin was a good artist. Almost never saw it. First time I saw Archie's artwork was in Wally Wood's Wits End #1, which was the mid-'60s. And he'd been editing and writing over at Warren magazines for a couple of years by that point. But an awful lot of writers would noodle like that and often have some really great ideas, and sort of like the pencils that you see, or at least used to see, on the back of the artboards when the artist would draw something and he'd get bored, or he'd try to figure out just how big to make Power Girl's breasts or whatever, and you'd see this great artwork on the back, but it's great artwork. This stuff that the writers do is fun. Jim Shooter actually drew the cover for me for a Chicago Comic-Con program book I was editing them at the time. This is around 78 or so. And I knew he was an artist. I knew he was a trained artist. So I thought it'd be kind of cool if he had drawn a Superman cover for our program book. And he did, and it was wonderful. It's one of my favorite pieces. Go figure.
Well, so you're already funded on this, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just a book. How many pages is the book?
It's be about 100.
100
and
pages.
it's cartoons, mostly cartoons. There's also a few little mini essays I've written that are about my theory of the cartoons and what I was doing at the time when I drew them, sort of my connection to the cartoons, what they mean to me. So there's also some little memoir-esque essays into the book as well. But yeah, mostly cartoons, at about 100 pages.
And I saw that one of the stretch or reward levels is you can actually get the images or the actual art. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a couple of different reward levels. One is prints from comics that actually are from cartoons that actually appeared in the book. And another one is original artwork. And I want to clarify, it's probably not going to be the original artwork of the cartoons in the book. It'll be different original artwork or prints from cartoons in the book.
Okay.
I might throw in a few of the originals for the cartoons, but these were drawn over such a long period of time. This is like, we were drawn over the course of 25 years. A lot of the originals don't even exist anymore. I don't
Really?
even know. Yeah.
You just scanned them?
I didn't think I just would photocopy them at work and, throw them away. I didn't, think anything about it.
Where were you working?
I worked at Portland State University for a long time, for like 20 years.
Wow.
Excellent.
They give you a
I had a
watch or
day job.
something?
What?
Yeah. Did they give you a watch or anything?
No,
Like 20
they
years?
gave me free photocopies. That was what I
And
got.
they didn't, and they didn't know that.
Yeah, I had to do that on the sly. Yeah, that was my. But I mean, it was technically working for the state of Oregon, so it was pretty decent gig in terms of like benefits and stuff. That was the hardest thing about making the leap to being a full-time creative, was like, what am I going to do without the the health insurance and the retirement? But I have to say, I would never go back if I didn't have to. It was the life of a writer is the life for me. Even though it is, risking poverty at every turn.
Well, writing is not a good way to make a living.
No, anybody out there like wondering how you can, thinking about this as a financial proposition, as a path to economic stability, I will disabuse you of that right now. It's scary as hell. And most of the stress of my life comes from the stress of like having to find the next pot of money to keep life going. But in terms of the life itself, I mean, I feel like I've gotten much better as a writer since I've been able to do it full time, and I enjoy living in what I call the palace of the mind, where it's like most of my day is spent just thinking about things and thinking about what I'm going to write, thinking about stories, and thinking about what it is I want to say with those stories. And it's a contemplative life I would recommend for anyone.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I sold my first piece shortly after my 17th birthday, and they paid me $5, which is what it was worth. It was like 2 paragraphs. And the thrill I got from that $5 check, I've had checks somewhat larger since then. But the thrill wasn't the same. The first time somebody pays you for your words, that's a thrill. That's a rush.
The first time I ever got paid for anything artistic was actually for one of my cartoons, and it was a Chinese restaurant that was having like a contest where you can they wanted someone to draw an ad using these 2 characters they created, these 2 panda characters they created. So I drew an ad for them using their 2 panda characters and sent it in, and I won the contest. So I got a free dinner for 4 by virtue of sending in this cartoon that I drew featuring these 2 pandas. and it was still it was like the first time I'd ever been paid for anything artistic. And you're right, I felt like a king going in there.
How was
Yeah.
that dinner?
It was delicious. I savored every bite, knowing that I didn't have to pay for it.
Exactly.
Free food, and
Yeah.
let me point out, stolen food. If you swipe the steak from the supermarket, tastes much better than anything else. Much better when you're young. When you're old and cynical, that wears off.
I recently made my debut as an artist in an actual comic book. I for the Ahoy title, My Bad, which I'm co-writing with Bryce Ingman. They actually let me draw one of the extras. One of the extras is a page of those old toy ads that you used to see in the backs of comic books.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they let me actually draw the little images for all the toys. So technically I am a professional artist now.
Excellent.
Johnson Smith, those toy ads, and I was pleasantly surprised to see an ad of theirs in maybe the first issue of More Fun Comics. It was one of the first ones, and that was the first comic published by what became DC Comics. Major Wheeler Nicholson was the guy who started that puppy, and hired Vin Sullivan, who stayed with the company after it got acquired by the mob. And those jokes, those gags, go all the way back to that, and probably 100 years before that. You know, Andrew Johnson had one of those little things where those spy eye things that would give you a black eye.
President
Sure.
Andrew Johnson?
Yeah, that one.
Is that why they tried to impeach him?
They should, for so many reasons. I mean, I've gotten over it. I don't know if he has, but yeah, there are a lot of reasons to be pissed off at that guy.
Yeah.
And there are a few reasons to admire him. I mean, after his inauguration, he opened up the White House to the public, and they savaged the place. They did more damage to it than the British did in 1812, except they didn't burn it down. And I kind of like that part. The rest,
Are we talking about Andrew Jackson?
yeah.
Oh,
Did
okay.
I
I
say
thought we were
Andrew
talking about
Johnson?
Andrew Johnson.
Oh,
But,
no.
That really goes way back. That's Andrew Jackson.
Yeah, and both guys they tried to impeach. They actually impeached Johnson, but they couldn't convict him, starting a long trend of not convicting presidents.
I think I've turned this into a history
I-
podcast.
That's okay. We can do that. We can do that. I do need to get to one thing though. So you mentioned that you got to draw in a Hoy book. You know who else got to draw in a Hoy book? It's that little thing called Second Coming Trinity #1. In the back, there's an illustration by a gentleman named Ed Cato, who is a friend of the show, who is running Ithacon. And we're going to go into a live read right now because
Nice.
Ithacon is next Saturday, not this coming Saturday, but the 22nd to the 23rd. It is the nation's second longest running comic convention at the Emerson Suites on Ithaca College campus. Tickets are available now at ithacon.org. You can see DC comic veterans Mike Gold, Jamal Eigel, and Glenn Whitmore, Ahoy's Tom Pyre, also a DC veteran, Megaton Man's Don Simpson, also a DC veteran, and JC Vaughn from the Overstreet Price Guide. The featured publisher, Ahoy Comics, will have a full crew of creators eager to greet you. Ithacon 46 will celebrate the 30th anniversary of DC's landmark Death of Superman event with Roger Stern and Color's Glenn Whitmore. I will be hosting that panel at that show. Plus, Ithacon is offering swag bags for all attendees who buy their tickets before April 16th, which is coming up very shortly. These overstuffed swag bags will offer over $20 value in comics, books, and more. Join us for Ithacon April 22nd and 23rd at Emerson Suites on the Ithaca College campus. Tickets are $20 for both days. Kids 7 to 17 are just $5, and kids 6 and under are free. Order your tickets now at ithacon.com, ithacon.org. Thank you for that.
Well done.
Yeah,
Thank you
really?
for that.
Boy, you just
All right,
slid
that's
that right in. That was great.
I did, but I want to talk about something else, and this is where it's going to get fun because Mark actually knows what we're going to talk about, but Mike doesn't, and it has to do with this, which
Yeah.
which is a something that has generated quite a bit of conversation between Mike and myself. We have spent a couple of hours at least over time talking about this book, this series, and how much we liked it, and how much all the different things about it. And Mark and I have talked about it. But one of the most interesting things that I noticed about it, I was reading issue 3 this past weekend, and I noticed the. Let's see if I can pull this up this way. Mike, did you notice anything interesting about this?
Irish Snap.
What?
The letterer who created this, what we think of as the real Superman logo.
Right. Well, they used the real Superman logo.
They used the real Superman logo. Whose idea was that?
I don't know. I didn't even know that was the old Superman logo until Bob told me.
So here's
I'm
the
guessing
old
it was
Superman logo.
Probably Brittany or Mike's idea. Brittany, our editor, or
it's
Mike
great.
Owens.
Give either or both of them my congratulations and compliments. It was the exact right move.
It makes total sense.
Did you notice that it was there, Mike?
Did I notice?
Yeah. Did you notice when it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't notice it.
I danced naked in the street.
So I told Mark that you might tell us why and or how did the logo change? In as clean a way as you can.
Yeah, that's a great straight line. And you know, it's hard to melt the internet. But back in '76, I'm thinking, our publisher Jeanette Kahn, who was fairly new to the job, she knew comics, but you know, she was publishing. Previously, she'd been publishing magazines for Scholastic, which is how I met her. And she, by that point in time, was more or less living with Neil Adams. I say more or less because they had separate places, but how much time they spent in their own separate places I'm not aware. It's something I'm not aware of. But Neil would sort of make a lot of suggestions because Neil made a lot of suggestions all the time. And a great many of them were brilliant. And a few were brilliant but not usable because that's how it goes. This one, for me and for just about everybody else at DC at the time, was not a popular decision. Neil explained to Jeanette how that logo was artistically incorrect. And I use those words punningly. He went over the logo, that logo, and drew how it should be, rounding off, making the sweep across the top consistent. And he was right about all of those things, technically. But that original Superman logo, to me, and I think to a great many people who'd been reading Superman by that point in time, that original logo was the flag. It's the American flag. It's the American flag of comics, you know? You just don't mess with that. And everybody on the floor, just about everybody, some people were smart enough to keep their mouths shut, not me, said, oh no, that's wrong. And Paul Levis, who was really clever, I don't know if he said this to Jeanette, although knowing Paul, I strongly suspect he did, said, it's also like one of the few logos that's actually registered with the patent office. Regis Padoff, which, by the way, was the name of a character we later used, with Mike Grell used on Bar Sinister for Valiant, and was recently used on a TV series, The Consultant. But Regis Padoff is actually registered U.S. Patent Office, and underneath that logo, and you see it in its original use, not on the cover, it says Regis Padoff underneath it. So Neil redesigned a few other things, and we were crazy about some of them. Some of them were great, but we were actually able to talk Jeanette out of his original design for the dollar comics because they would be too limiting and wouldn't provide us with the most important feature of a comic book cover, particularly back in the newsstand days, which is it leaps off of the stands from all of the others. And you see it on the wall, all of those dollar comics covers would have looked pretty much the same. You'd have to take a second look to see whether to look at the logo or the character or what have you. So we were able to get that eliminated, and I guess that was a trade for the Superman logo, but I'm still annoyed. Strictly a fanboy's annoyance.
But it wasn't
Because
until
Neil was
'83.
right. I'm
Well,
sorry?
it wasn't until '83 that it went on the Superman cover.
Was it really?
It was '83
Wow.
was the first
Wow.
was when that that one with Luthor on the cover was the first time that the logo changed on the cover, which was
On the
'83.
cover. See, my memory is now the result of COVID. Not that I had COVID, but I lost all sense of time. Just and I know I'm not alone. But I haven't recovered.
But we wasn't it they paid a bunch of money to get somebody to redesign it, not just off of Neil's, sketch or whatever.
No, they paid. Excuse me, Milton Glaser, who was a very, very popular designer. Designed many magazines, got awards for all those magazines. He even designed like supermarkets and stuff. But I love great design. He did that classic Bob Dylan poster of the 80s, 60s rather. And he also designed the DC Bullet,
Right.
which I also had problems with. DC didn't have a logo at the time, which was annoying. But that new logo, I was doing like house ads and stuff, so I had to get that DC Bullet shrunk down to the size of an atom. And all of Milton's inline work would boogie up because we were using those plates at World Color Press. The plates were made out of, I think, silly putty. So the lines, once printed, would get all wiggly and stuff. So that was a pain in the ass.
So this is what it was before, which is they've gone back to something like that now, right? Before the Bullet logo, and
Yeah, that was the last pre-Bullet.
And then we went to this.
Yeah, the phrase "Bullet" comes from the Superman National Comics logo.
Right.
Because it kind of looks like a bullet if you've stared at the butt end of a lot of bullets.
Right.
Oddly enough, I haven't, but I guess I did. I stared at it enough.
Well, I want to talk, if we can talk about this. I want to talk about your work, Mark, and kind of what I've gotten from it. Now, you've done that intro video was a lot of stuff in it. It's just a scraping of it and what you've done in the last, not 8 years or so in comics. It's incredible how prolific you've been in that time, because some of those things you've done multiple iterations of. We were talking earlier about letterers that you've had. I think that Hassan Atzman Elhau on Red Sonja for you changed the game. I
will interject in just a second what you're saying. He was a brilliant letterer, and a lot of times he did things in the lettering of that comic I had no idea were even like possible. They would let you do like the words dripping out of the balloon, or the sound effects like happening within the object that's making them, like making it up like a drawing. He just was a brilliant letterer.
He really pushed it in that, and I think that elevated him, to the top of the. He's in the top 5, I would say, right now.
Yeah, it's a great tradition that guys like Marvel and DC never really indulged in until comparatively recently. You know, letterers sometimes could go crazy just lettering all day. Um, Steve Haney was lettering The Flash for me, and around issue, I think 7 or so. This is the 1987 Flash.
Hmm.
Around issue 7 or so, Steve was done with the job, was about to send it back, but he had some time before he had to leave. So he hand lettered the entire indicia on the first page. And he just sends it in, and I look at the stuff, and I go, I do a double take. I do one of those, like a Tex Avery takes, you know, with the eyes. And I had to fight my way through our production department in order to keep that. And I went nuts, which I did a lot at DC. But at that time, it brought the best out in you. And I said, look, this is the word for word. This is the indicia. It's the real indicia. What's your problem with it? Well, blah, 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 blah. So they got to the point where it was easier to just not do any additional work if it would shut me up. I get a lot accomplished that way. I get a lot done that way.
That's a big part of the comic business. It's like, well, what's the path of least resistance? What are people not going to complain about?
You've learned that.
Right. We got deadlines here, boss. Shut up. But so that was like the most subtle thing. But you look at the Spirit, you know, from the 40s and 50s, which is when they published the Spirit, that I don't think anybody mastered it better than Abe Kenigson, I think is his last name, except for the guy who lettered Pogo for Walt Kelly. He was a complete master at it. It was part of the look of Pogo.
I want to I kind of wanted to talk about the use of the Superman character in your work, Mark, because you've done it a lot. It seems to be there. And one of the other things that I've noticed is there are two overarching themes in your work, and I hope maybe I've caught this. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wishful thinking, but the themes of compassion and fairness are some of the things that you are trying to tell and talk to the readers about. Am I fair? Am I right? Wrong in that?
I don't know. I think you're probably right. I am in the deep in the middle of my own writing. I have no idea what I'm really, you know, what it's about until somebody else reads it and tells me.
Well, I'm telling you, those are the things that jump out. And the use of the Superman character, both figuratively and literally. Obviously, literally, you've written Superman quite a bit, but figuratively in terms of Sunstar. Do you think that helps with the messages of those that you are getting out there? I mean, obviously, you know, there's some point of those themes in your writing.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the reason why I gravitate to Superman and I love writing Superman is because to me, he's sort of the ultimate thought experiment. Like if you had that power, you know, what would you do to fix civilization, or what would it be like if we acted like Superman, if we chose to be our best selves? And so I think that's where a lot of the compassion and, you know, just the decency, which seems to be sort of themes that pervade my work. Like this really isn't that complicated. You know, we could always choose to be empathetic, compassionate people. We just get, you know, tempted by, you know, money and bacon wrapped things into being bastards, you know? So really, I think it's about the thought experiment that Superman represents. And I think also he is somebody who has every excuse, every right to use his power for untoward means, and nobody could stop him. And, you know, he sees the worst of humanity every day when he's out, and yet somehow he doesn't succumb to it. He doesn't, you know, allow his morality or his empathy to be eroded by all of the crooks he deals with on a daily basis. And there's something magical, and I think there's a secret to that. It's like, how do we engage evil and pettiness and destructiveness in the world without becoming it? And I think to me that's always been sort of the enigma of Superman, that if we could crack it, we would be a much better place.
I think the trick to that is that it's non-Kryptonian. It's how Clark Kent was raised. It was his parents, the values that he got from his parents, that gave him his worldview, which makes sense because at that time he had really no memories of Krypton, didn't even know from Krypton as a little kid. But he was raised right. He was raised to be considerate and compassionate and to put everything into perspective.
Well, I think
You
it
know?
also helps that he came here as a refugee. So it gives them a certain amount of baseline empathy for people who are, down and out, people who are having to flee a bad situation,
Right.
because that's what he had to do. And I think it also gives them a better view of humanity, thinking, well, these are the people who saved me. These are the people who took me in when I was a refugee from my own world. But yeah, I think to your point, though, you are right. He is sort of the accumulation of all of the best parts of the people who loved him. He has the sort of the compassion of Martha and the wisdom of Jonathan Kent. And I think kind of the secret sauce is the courage, which I think he gets mostly from Lois Lane, because Lois Lane goes into the same situations he does, but does it without any superpowers, without any sort of invulnerability. And she is like sort of his introduction to why it's so important to be committed to the truth, even though powers would rather have you engage in public relations. And I think that, there's a reason why truth is the first sort of quality in his logo, Truth, Justice, the American Way. It's sort of the bedrock upon which everything else is built. And I think that Lois Lane is sort of his model of the truth.
The one thing that I agree with you, and I think that's a brilliant point. The one thing that Lois has always been, even in the earliest days that would create anybody with any political awareness of our environment to think, oh, Lois, grow up. She was fearless. Even from the very beginning, she was fearless. She wasn't reckless. Occasionally situations would come up, but she wasn't reckless. She was fearless. And as we tried to bring the character into a contemporary reality, and the feminist movement was, the contemporary feminist movement was under full steam, you wanted to put more flesh on that character. And boy, everything that you just said, that's what they focused on. There was a 2-part Lois Lane microseries that Mindy Newell wrote that does a beautiful job of that. It was, I'm not sure when it was, but it was some time ago. It was like the 80s, I think.
I think it was late 80s, right around late 80s, early 90s. I think it may have been 89. I could be wrong.
Could be. I was just talking to Mindy before I came here. She was concerned about Trump.
I'm sure she was.
God bless.
So, along the lines of, there's another thing that kind of flows through the work that you've done. And you question religious themes without attacking them in a very interesting way. Obviously there was a big brouhaha over Second Coming when it was at DC. And I think the best line you've ever said was that Dan DiDio said that you're not going to bring your was it not hedonism? You're not going to bring your blasphemy to him, right? But the concept is that, like, a lot of the things that you talk about, and obviously you have dealt with your own, religious journey or faith journey, but it's very interesting how you're able to walk a line and talk about things, especially with Sunstar and Jesus and that dynamic. And it almost feels like you're just pointing out the hypocrisy of it. It's very interesting. Where do you think you? Why do you think you do that?
Well, I think that, it's not like you said, it's not an attempt to sort of make fun of religion or to assassinate the idea of religion, because I think in some way or another we all need it. We all need to feel attached to something bigger than ourselves. We all need to feel like we have a place in the universe. And some people look to organized religions for that feeling. Some people look to art. Some people look elsewhere for that feeling that their existence was not a mistake. So I don't make fun of that at all, because it's something I myself feel I need. What I do satirize is how institutions and con artists sort of get in the middle of that and try to like make a buck, or to like make your faith an asset of their organization rather than their institution an asset to your faith. And I think this is what Second Coming was really sort of, this is what causes Christ to have a fit when he comes back to earth and he sees what's been done, is that it's the exact opposite of what he intended. He came to earth to show people how to live without needing to be of service to empires and to con men, and he finds that message itself has been co-opted by empires and con men. So it's hard for him to take, but it's never was never intended to be satiric or making fun of Christ himself, but about the Christian institutions that have risen up around him. And I think maybe that's
of people who believe in him.
Yeah, well, or people who believe in him, because I think that he said a lot of wonderful, brilliant things, and he was, in a lot of ways, sort of the most radical of all the ancient, sort of prophets and philosophers, because he preached something that was completely alien to the ancient world, and that is forgiveness, which was just mind-blowingly out of left field in a world where everybody who did anything did so because there was somebody going to stab them if they didn't do it, or you'd pay them a few gold coins if they did. The idea that you would forgive somebody or that you would do something for somebody purely because they're your fellow human being was utterly alien to that world. And to me, that's one of the reasons why Christianity has endured despite all the abuse it's taken at the hands of its institutions, is that the core idea that we don't have to be this way, that we can sort of remember what it was that we loved about each other, and act on that and not upon greed or retribution. That's still like a very relevant philosophy.
I believe personally that we only need one commandment. I was shocked to discover many decades ago that the Ten Commandments aren't the same from Bible to Bible necessarily, from religion to religion, that there are differences. You figure, well, there's no wiggle room here. They're the Ten Commandments. Come on. So I rewrote the whole thing into one because, editors are assholes. And my one commandment is, thou shalt not be a dick. And I can live with that. I think that's what we all should agree on. Just stop being a dick. Have a little compassion.
What you don't know is there's a copper sign right up there above that robin, and it says, "Don't be a dick."
Really?
Yes.
Well, I was in D.C. for the whole Swamp Thing incident, and I know the real reason why they shit canned that issue. But if you can't I don't know that story. Tell that story, Mark. You don't know what he's talking about. If you can't, well, let me finish the thought first. If you can't comment on religion, you can't communicate. Religion is one of the most important forces most individuals have. So as a storyteller, how can you avoid that? I understand if you're having Thanksgiving dinner, there are certain things that are going to make it go rough. But when you're writing is about ideas. You're communicating ideas.
Yeah, I think
Good
it's
ideas,
the
bad
difference
ideas.
between at Thanksgiving dinner you're with people in a confined space that you're forced to be there with. So there's a very
Yeah,
different set of rules, where as opposed to putting something on a bookshelf where presumably only people who are looking for your writing are going to pick it up and be forced force themselves to read it. So it's a very different what a disaster it would be if writers tried to like abide by Thanksgiving rules of etiquette when writing.
I'd be out of
It'd be
business.
like 20 books like in the library, just like pass the peas. May I have more mashed potatoes?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The Swamp Thing was sort of was an issue. Was it John Toddleman who Rick Veitch that era? Um, it,
So
it was
later,
sort of
later.
it was sort of a direct assault on the Christ myth. And I'm not talking about the reality because everybody's got their own ideas of the reality. I don't want to get into that. This was of the overall kind of myth. And it didn't work out well for fundamentalists. And one person on DC staff, a senior executive, was very religious, and he said that he would quit if that book was published. And it really came down to that. Some people loved it, some people hated it. Karen Berger was fighting the good fight for it, and there's nothing I admire more than that. But at the end, Jeanette just sort of looked at it and said, a rabbi's daughter, I should point out, Jeanette said, well, we need this guy more than we need this story. And we really need this guy. We can do another story. And that's why that decision was made. Second Coming, on the other hand, I can't figure that out. Now, I wasn't there for it, and Lord knows I had no, flesh in it. But
The green lighting or the shit canning?
I'm sorry?
The green lighting or the shit canning?
Yeah, I think you could probably be mystified by either decision.
That's true. That's very true. So I followed the controversy because it's a fun kind of controversy, and it took you, I think, about an hour and a half to get Ahoy to pick it up. And I was thinking, wow, these guys made a really dangerous decision. Well, as it turns out, no, it's not a dangerous decision to publish a brilliant comic book that's really good and totally defensible on every level, should you have a PR nightmare. Now, would I publish that in certain states in the United States of America today? I don't know if I got that much guts. But at that time, it was just a couple of years ago, I think DC made a big mistake. Big mistake.
I feel like I don't fault DC. I think that they're in the business of selling Batman pajamas and stuff, and this was not going to
yeah, that's true.
Move like Superman hairbrushes or anything. But I was naive enough at the time, even though I realized what this idea was going to sound like to people. And they said, "Oh, it's a comic book about Jesus Christ sharing an apartment with a superhero, and they have adventures together." I knew how that sounds to people, but I was naive enough to imagine that people would actually like read it before they develop judgments. And
oh, yeah,
I should have known better
that's
because
a mistake.
There was a long gap of time between when it was announced and when it actually came out, so it was a lot of it just gave a lot of room for feigned outrage to sort of to dominate the narrative and control the conversation between when it actually came out. When it actually did come out, all of that stuff just sort of evaporated. All the sort of hysteria and like people like talking about it without even having read a single page of the comic. All those people just were lost their credibility instantly as soon as it came out. But there was about a year that they were the only ones really talking about it, controlling the narrative. So I can understand why DC felt the heat during that time. I think it was in the end not only a good a good development for Ahoy, which was brand new and needed some publicity. It was pure asset to them, but also for the comic itself, because Ahoy let me put extra pages in the first issue. They let us bring on a second artist to give the interior art more of like a variety feel, from like depending on whether the scenes were taking place in heaven or on Earth. And so I feel like they made it a much better comic than it would have been had it stayed at Vertigo. And also, you know, if DC had kept it and gone through it, they probably would have, like, you know, thanked me for my service after this first 6 issues, then asked me never to make another one for as long as I lived. You know, they would have shown me the door. Whereas Ahoy has allowed us to this, and we're approved for a 4th. So awesome. It's probably the best thing that could have happened to the comic for it to get dropped by Vertigo and picked up by Ahoy.
Well, and Volume 3, number 1 just came out, which is great, and it made my life better. But to be fair to DC, which I try to do under duress, that was the time, I think, when they were trying to get this relationship going with AT&T.
Yeah, it was not a good time to get called into the principal's office at DC. They had a president. They'd just been acquired by AT&T, and you know, then the Batwing thing happened. So it was a time where
it was right around that time.
People were a little nervous about, you know, having their name brought up in a board meeting. So it's kind of understandable.
Paul Levitz's entire career as publisher and president was hiding from Time Warner anybody, because he thought that if they didn't really look at him, they could do better stuff. And I think he was absolutely right about that. At the time, he took an enormous amount of heat, and that time lasted 10 years or so. But I think he was right. Prior to all that, if you picked up the Time Warner annual report, you would barely see DC mentioned. I don't think DC played a visible role in that annual report until maybe the first Batman movie. You know, that would probably be about the right time. But before that, the day before that, you wouldn't notice. And Paul was right. Not noticing is a good thing if you're producing material that might possibly piss some insane person off. And if you're not pissing off at least one insane person, you ain't trying. And I mean that seriously.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think if everybody is happy with what you're doing, you're probably doing it wrong, because you're not taking chances. You're coloring within the lines.
Right. You're making bazooka gum. You're not making.
You're making stories. A Turtles song or something. You know, you're not really. You're trying to play the market. You're not really writing about something you feel strongly about. And I'm okay with the fact that there may be a lot of people who aren't happy or comfortable with what I'm saying in a comic. I'm happy you're okay with the fact that most people might not be happy with what I'm saying in a comic, because my feeling is I don't write for those people. I write for the people who do actually enjoy my stuff. And as long as there's enough of those people, then what do I care if 99% of the human population doesn't care about it?
Good storytelling comes from the heart. Your brain is well involved in this, but that's usually on revisions. It comes from the heart. And if you squander that opportunity, you're not being faithful to yourself. And if you're not being faithful to yourself, how can you be faithful to your audience?
I feel like that as a reader, the thing I most want to read is like, well, what is this? What is the thing that is really bothering this person? What is this? If this person were going to die tomorrow, what is the one thing they would want to say? And that's always what I find compelling. The thing that people feel they can't not talk about.
That's right. That's right. Jim Starlin has made an entire career, I don't think with malice aforethought, dealing with his Christianity, with his upbringing. And he's put that to very good use. He promoted it to this cosmic level, which is fine because people aren't going to give you a lot of shit if you say it's cosmic, man. That's your excuse. But he'd done decades of really good, solid storytelling. Um, you're doing the same thing, but without that tarp underneath to catch your drippings. It's going to fall on the reader, and that's fine. You're not doing it maliciously. You're doing it as part of the story. And quite frankly, if that guy has a problem with it, those 10 guys over there probably do not. So you're doing great.
Yeah, my feeling is if it's okay not to like my stuff, there's plenty of other books out there.
Yeah, you got to have that. That's a great philosophy for life. There's 8 billion of us on this planet. You don't like me, pick another.
Yeah, there's no shortage.
One of the things, just to go back, what you were mentioning earlier, was people hadn't read it. My first real experience with Second Coming was from somebody who had read it, because and yet you're right, it was right around the time Batman Damned had come out. So Batman Damned had come out, and that was like in September, October, because it was at Baltimore Comic Con. I remember that time, and then I believe the Second Coming had been announced like right around then, but it just barely announced. And then I was at Thanksgiving of that year. I had gone and spent some time with John Workman, and he was already lettering issue 1 with DC, and he was like, "Oh, I'm lettering this new book, and it's this thing, and it's about this," and he's telling me about it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I heard about that. Mark Russell is great," because I just read Snagglepuss, and I can't wait to read it. And he was like, "I'm like, you need to read the other thing," and he was so excited about it. And then, a couple of months later, somebody read something about it, and here we are. So, but again, my first experience with it was that somebody had read it and was so excited about it. So I think
that's good. That's good to know.
The best publicity you'll get ever in anything is word of mouth.
Oh, I agree. That's how pretty much I have my career, because I think my breakout title was probably the Flintstones, and it wasn't like a heavily promoted, or it wasn't a book where you see like a Flintstones title on the shelves, people are going to be flocking to it, but
right.
but it percolated, and I think the word of mouth kind of like got it into a lot more hands.
It was nominated for an Eisner, right?
There was so much good material in those Hanna-Barbera books, Snagglepuss included, and I wouldn't have thought so when they announced it and they acquired Hanna-Barbera and they finally did something with it. That Batman Porky Pig story that was so good that Neil Adams decided to animate it. I mean, wow. That's word of mouth.
So I want to get to something else real quick, kind of talk about, since we brought this up. Like, it's interesting how DC, and they have this staple of characters that they continually step over themselves with. For example, the stuff that they did with the Hanna-Barbera characters, that you did, that everyone, not one of them was a bad story. So much rich thing there, and crossing over DC characters with Hanna-Barbera characters, even if they made Hanna-Barbera characters, and like you did with Flintstones and stuff like that, were great. The other thing they have is they have the Hanna-Barbera cartoon characters as well. All of the they have Johnny Quest, and the fact that Future Quest was so well made. And there is not a Johnny Quest book at DC right now. They're throwing away money. I say it all the time. Not that they care about it.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to, I don't know why they don't do that sort of thing anymore, other than that it distracts from the selling of Batman pajamas. But but I feel like the reason why the Hanna-Barbera comics were such a relief and such a nice experience for writers and artists was because it had this sort of rented car effect, where it's like, I don't have to worry about scratching this or wrecking into something, so I can actually drive. I can let it go on the freeway a little bit. And I think that's kind of magical, and it's rare that you get it in a a big two or a major company where they're like, just tell the story you want to tell, however you want to tell it. And when you get that sort of freedom combined with that sort of name recognition and just sort of ability to work with like a big titles, I think you have the potential for something sort of magical.
When the first Suicide Squad movie came out, of the two, DC had a red carpet. Warner Brothers had a red carpet premiere in New York at the Beacon Theater, which is a nice place to do that. And John Ostrander and I were invited, which was very nice of them. And they had a party before the screening. Dan DiDio threw a very, very nice party, and everybody on the East Coast and a lot of people from the West Coast and some folks who just wander the earth showed up. I hadn't seen Keith Giffen for a couple of years, so we're catching up. And I said, I complimented him on whatever it was he had just done. I enjoyed, and he says, "No, read my Hanna-Barbera stuff. This stuff is crap. Read the Hanna-Barbera stuff." And I'm going like, okay, you're being so insistent because nobody believes that anybody can do a good Hanna-Barbera story. And I'm a Bob Montana fan. I like Archie from the 40s. You can do a good anything story. It's not
I agree with that.
It's not the character. It's your approach. You're not a failure if you can't. It's just not for you. But you can do a great Flintstones story. I just turned them into a punk rock band. The Flintstones. It's possible. Characters are characters. Stories are stories. The characters bring you the fodder you need to make the story. The story's on you.
Right. It's really not about, what you're into, I think, that gives something depth. It's about what you get out of it. Right. And I think that's, it's not that, the Flintstones are two-dimensional or, these Hanna-Barbera characters are two-dimensional. It's that you as, a multi-dimensional writer need to make that story multi-dimensional. It's not, you need to make it about you and about, your place in the world and make it something worth reading. It's, but yeah, I've never, I try never to judge anything based upon what it's about, because I realize it's 99% of its quality is going to be in the execution.
That's right. That's absolutely right. I mean, if you have a phenomenal, I'm sorry, Bob, if you have a phenomenal idea and it's a phenomenal idea, you're going to run with that. If it works, not all phenomenal ideas turn into good stories. Many, many do. And it's always worth the effort. But, you got to deliver and you have to communicate. Storytelling is a communications form. It is the most powerful communications form. It's what all other communications forms have in common. You got to communicate.
I heard recently, I read that, most mammal species are awake for 8 hours a day and they sleep for 16. And this is because they need that 8 hours to get food and, drink and take care of their survival needs. And then it actually is in the benefits their survival to then shut down and use up less energy over the next 16 hours, which is why they sleep so much. But humans are the opposite. Humans are awake for 16 hours and sleep 8 hours because there were so much of a survival advantage to humans to be able to sit around the campfire at night and tell stories and talk to each other. That is a fundamental part of human evolution. The need to sort of like have time where we're not just like sort of fighting for our survival or gathering food, but we're just sitting around talking to each other and making up stories. This is not just like enjoyable. It's not just something we do for fun. This is a fundamental part of what it is to be human, and something that has allowed us to survive despite the fact that we are, pretty otherwise kind of a crap species. We don't have
well, we are
fur or, horns or fangs or whatever.
Right, exactly.
Some time ago, I had this wonderful experience. just north of you in up by the Canadian border on Interstate 5. Excuse me. That I was staying at Mike Grell's house, and for years I'd been promoting Mike as the guy who writes stories you can tell around a campfire. So Mike thought it would be cute if he and some of his neighbors got around a campfire. They built a nice little campfire, and we spent the night telling stories. Genuine campfire storytelling. And it was beautiful. Now, we had a couple professional writers there, but it doesn't matter. Because people were handing down old stories, around the campfire. That's why we have history books today. So it's a wonderful experience to physically enjoy that campfire story.
Yeah,
Bob, I sat on you a minute ago. Do you
Well,
remember what it was?
I do. It was kind of talking about what Mark, and I want to after this I want to segue to something else, but it's kind of what Mark was saying about, it doesn't matter what your experience with a character is, it's the story. For example, my experience with Sonia, Red Sonia, prior to your coming on the book, I nothing against anybody who wrote it. It wasn't. It didn't gravitate to me. Like, I've read some of the stuff and it wasn't, but when you were writing Red Sonja, and I don't know that this is everyone's experience, but it was my experience. When you were writing Red Sonja, it was the first book I read that week, whenever it came out. It was so important because the story you were telling, one of the things, I like sword and sorcery as much as the next guy, but I'm not gonna just go to a book just because there's bloody battles or fights or whatever. The fights are not what attracts me in a book, but the battles had such catastrophic outcomes, and the casualties of the story that you were telling just was devastating. And so it was really important that, again, that's a perfect example where the writer on that book told a story that where the characters may not have appealed to me prior to, but the story was important enough for me to read it.
There's
Yeah,
some good
thank
talents
you.
on that series.
Yeah, it was. I really enjoyed writing that, and I enjoyed the fact that they let me sort of imbue it with sort of ancient history, notes from ancient history, which I'm a huge fan of. But what I wanted to tell a story more about the consequences of violence than about the fights or battles themselves. And I think this is where like a lot of sword and sandal or sort of like action comics sort of go wrong, is they think they're actually about the action. They think they're about the violence, whereas the violence is really just the delivering mechanism to tell the story about the consequences of it. And to me, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to tell like a war story that focused on, the not only the chess match between Sonia and Dragon the Magnificent, her arch nemesis, but also about the consequences for all the people who are fighting in this war.
Yeah.
I see that Gail is doing a novel. I read some.
Yes. I can't wait.
Yeah,
That's
no,
cool.
Yeah,
I'm
I like
looking
that. I
forward
like
to
the
that.
idea that you take characters not only and put them with different writers or put them in different settings, but put them in different mediums. I like that idea a lot, and I hope they do more of that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, it depends
And
on
with
how
Gail,
many
I'm
people
sure
buy this one.
it'll be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It must be scary for her. I don't think she's written novels before. I could be wrong about that, but
I don't think she has. I think this is her first novel.
yeah, that's got to be a little scary.
I'm sure it is.
Hmm.
We've been talking
Good
about
for her.
satire and humor and irreverence, and I want to just take a minute. Yesterday, comics lost somebody very important, and we're just going to take a minute and remember Al Jaffrey here. 1 second.
Ah,
So, Mike, what's your experiences that you've had with Al? I mean, I'm sure you.
I only met him a few times.
Mhm.
I was at the old Mad offices not infrequently, and I got to know many of those people quite well. Um, Al was not there very often.
Hmm.
However, I'm thinking it's about a dozen years ago. He was guest of honor at the National Cartoonist Society dinner. Used to be held like 4 times a year in Connecticut,
Hmm.
and we would all make a joke about how they would just honor the oldest guy in the room. Well, this is 12 years ago or longer, and
He was 90 then.
yeah, he was only 90 then, if
Right.
that old. Um, I have to point out that he was brilliant. His speech was. I would have paid good money. Actually, maybe I did pay good money, but that was for the food, which wasn't that good. Um, my problem with the overall setting was I was constantly being seated at the children's table, along with like Bob Smith and Jerry Ordway, because we were the children compared to the rest of these guys. After a while, that wore a little thin, but and they had more and more room after a while in the rest of the restaurant. But Al just got up there and did a little, marker talk thing, and my first instinct was, what's going to happen to those big pieces of paper? I want them. I got to steal them. And I could see around our little table of children, of middle-aged children, everybody else had the exact same thought. It's like, if everybody would just turn around and not look for a second, we're going to go nuts. Al Jaffe, probably more than anybody else in the Mad Magazine days, taught children how to be insolent. Snappy answers to stupid questions.
Mhm.
You can get hurt doing that in real life. But I was laughing my ass off. It was my favorite feature. The fold-in. Fold-in's a legend. It's my generation's Rube Goldberg. It was just a phenomenon that existed onto itself. And, I mean, by the time a guy's 102, you don't expect to see him all that much in the future.
Right.
I'm sorry to say, and I lost a very, very good friend yesterday as well. So
I'm
it
sorry.
was a double. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about.
I do.
It's a double. It was a double whammy for me. But Al was, you make that list of absolute most phenomenal people in this business, in this genre, in this medium. Al Jaffe's there. No matter how short that list is, Al Jaffe's there. He'll always be there.
Mark, did you have any? I noticed you mentioned something about him online. Did it?
Yeah, no, I loved Al Jaffe. Mad Magazine was sort of the first and really the only like comic I read regularly as a kid.
Mhm.
And for a while, I wasn't allowed to read it, so I think my parents were afraid it was making me too much of a smartass. They felt it was like Socrates corrupting the youth, and it probably was. But
They weren't wrong.
it was a sort of corruption I wanted. But yeah, I remember probably my biggest sort of compliment for Al Jaffe was that I would try to get to the. I always made it a point to try to get to the grocery store when Mad Magazine arrived, like that afternoon, before everybody had folded in the fold-up comics. Because if we got there too late, they would all be folded. All the back covers would be folded already.
I had a similar experience just in terms of going to the place the day the magazine came out. There was a drugstore 3 blocks from me, and this other kid who was 2 years younger than me and I would be there every day right after school to open up the bundle of new comics and be the first to go through it. That other guy was Merrick Garland.
Oh, wow.
Attorney General. He lived 3 blocks the other direction from it. And he and Obama, when Obama appointed him to the Supreme Court to no good effect, um, they whined about how both of them had to sell their comic book collections in order to pay for law school. So I totally get that. You got to be there to open it. Of course, you're like 14. I mean, you don't have any patience when you're 14.
Right.
Exactly.
That was great. That was great. And so I totally respect you're wanting to get there before the fold-in got folded in.
Once it was already folded, it was like, finding somebody who's like been using your bath water or something. It's like,
That's right. Yeah, right. It's soiled.
yeah, I gotta start over.
I like the computer version where they just sort of fold it in for you. You click through and you can actually see it coming together, and that's actually a better experience.
I used to, before I folded it, would look and try to figure out what it was going to be before I felt it. But I found that to be the thief of joy. So then I would go the opposite direction. I would purposely not try to figure out what it was going to be when it folded, and just enjoy the pure ecstasy of watching the image come together.
It was also a lot of work to take the flat.
You have to match it up perfect.
And because Jappy was that good. Usually, you can kind of figure it out pretty fast. Not on those fold-ins. And even if you got it, you weren't certain you were right. So
it was so much worse to get it in your own way than to get it the way he intended.
Right. That's right. That's right. Let that be a lesson to you upstarts.
We want to. We're gonna remind everybody that Bunk Bed Mishaps is still available.
How long is the Kickstarter?
This Kickstarter goes until I think May 3rd. So we're still pretty in the kind of the beginning phases, but feel free to go on if you want a book. And there's also some really cool rewards. Feel free to go check it out. Sign up for something.
Right. We want to make sure everybody's there, and the link to it is in the comment section. Wherever you're watching this, we're going to be reposting this discussion so everybody can see it. But I just want to remind people that it's there. I
got the email announcing it while we were at the Chicago show last weekend, so I haven't done it yet. But
good. I know I got one more. At least one more person out there.
You got at least one more.
Well, I haven't backed it yet either. I just saved it quick because I was also in Chicago, and I'm like, I gotta. We immediately were like, more to talk about.
I think I was the only person who wasn't in Chicago.
No, because half the people were in Orlando. So
I've never done C2E2. I'd love to do it, but I've never done it. I was at WonderCon though, so it was like,
yeah,
you were with
after the convention, or whenever I'm in Chicago, which is about 3-4 times a year. On the Monday of when I'm there, we tend to get together, we meaning about a dozen people from the comics community, and have lunch. They do it without me. It's not a me thing. They do eat when I'm not around. But this time I got to bring Bob. And it's the highlight of every trip back home. I mean, I don't know, dyed-in-the-wool Chicagoan, but my favorite thing by far is that lunch that we get with guys like Alex Ross and Hilary Barda, sometimes Alan Weiss, who isn't let out of his apartment very often, and just a wonderful group of people. Jim Engel, Jim Wisniewski, just brilliant people, very gifted artists, and all we do is sit around and jab each other. I'm having such a great time there. It was great.
Part of the discussion was about the Superman logo, ironically.
Yes, and I don't think I started that one.
I imagine.
Well, yeah, it was somebody being upset about the fact that they weren't being allowed to use the old logo, and here I do, and then I look at yours and I'm like, oh, there it is. But I don't want to keep you any longer, Mark. I appreciate you guys. Appreciate you doing this. We're excited about the Kickstarter. I've already read issue 1 of Trinity.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
And it's great. I'm really looking forward to this arc. It's just it's great stuff. Keep doing it, and we need to get you somehow to come out to Baltimore so that you can have crab cakes with your awards dinner instead of chicken.
Oh, that you are barking up my alley. That sounds great. Baltimore crab cake.
Mark, you're literally one of my favorite writers working today, and I've said that before. So therefore, it must be true. The beautiful thing about the comics medium is that we constantly get an influx of really gifted new writers, but nothing like we've seen the last decade or so. And you play a really big part of that. It's been a pleasure to share a screen with you.
Well, thank you. It's been absolutely a blast, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks very much, everybody. And we're going to be back. I'm going to let Mark go because I know he's got to do something. So I'm going to pull you out of the screen, and we'll talk to you soon. Mike and I will most likely be back next week without technical problems. We are during this broadcast. I've got confirmation from at least one of our guests, and we're going to be talking about another Kickstarter next week. Hopefully, we'll be having some people. We can talk about some of the new Gold Key revival with Barlos Karloff, and I think we're going to be talking about that next week. So everyone, stay tuned. Cool. Come back next week, and we will see you guys soon along the way.
This has been a production of the Pop Culture Squad Network. PopCultureSquad.com. How do you nerd?